Good morning, everyone. I'm Marie Wiles, Superintendent of Schools here in Guilderland, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our second remote learning reopening panel discussion. We had the opportunity to meet with a group of community members last evening, and here we are again this morning, waiting for this opportunity to give you an update on where we are in the reopening of schools and to answer your questions. So before we start with the presentation, I'd like to introduce the folks who are on our panel discussion this morning who will be helping answer questions. So I'm going to ask everyone to wave when I say their name. And Dr. Singleton, I'm going to start with you. Dr. Damian Singleton, our Assistant Superintendent for Instruction. We also have with us Danielle Poirier, our Director of Transportation. Thank you. Mike Laster, Farnsworth Middle School Principal. Bob Winans, our Instructional Administrator for Music. Amy Perrott, our Communications Specialist, and the busiest woman on this panel with all of our communication efforts. We also have Mrs. Knowles, who is our Director of Pupil Personnel Services. Dr. Alan Lockwood, who is our Guilderland Elementary School Principal. And next to him is Mr. Neil Sanders, our Assistant Superintendent for Business. And also with us this morning is Marcia Ranieri, our Instructional Administrator for English Language Learners and World Languages. We also have with us this morning Mr. Peter Brabant, who is the Principal at Altamont Elementary School. And Mr. Clifford Nooney, our Director of Facilities. Also with us this morning is Mr. Michael Piscatelli, our high school principal. And also we have Mr. Regan Johnson, who is our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources. And last but not least, our Director of Health, PE, and Interscholastic Sports, Mr. Dave Austin. So thank you all of you. Thanks to all of you for being with us this morning. I'm going to take a minute and turn on my PowerPoint presentation to give an overview of our reopening plan so far. And then we have many, many questions from our community members. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. So give me one moment here to switch to our presentation and then we'll get started. Okay, everyone, here we are. Actually, it is August 19th, not the 18th as my slide says here, but we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about our plan for reopening schools in September. So I welcome everyone who is part of our session this morning. Here's our agenda for the evening. We're going to start with a brief summary of the reopening of schools process. And then I'll provide a summary of our plan itself, focusing in on these areas: health and safety, school schedules, K-12 instructional programs, student support services, non-instructional services. And then we'll want to spend a good portion of our time on questions and answers that our community members have sent to us. So we have those questions that have been previously submitted. However, if as you watch, you have additional questions, you can send them during this program to the reopening@guilderlandschools.net email address, and our communications specialist, Amy Perrott, is monitoring that. And as we get toward the end of our time, any questions that come in, we will do our best to answer them. So let's begin. So just a couple words about process. This has been quite a long process involving lots of folks, but we started back in May with a reopening of schools steering committee that quickly grew because we realized that the scope of work was quite tremendous. So we have 6 reopening of schools subcommittees, and you can see the areas that they focused on. This included 120 stakeholders who gave their time and their energy and their commitment to thinking through all of these various areas. So I can't say thank you enough to those individuals. And I'm just pleased to point out that when we put out the request for help, we had far more people wanting to participate than we had space on committee. So again, Guilderland is so blessed with people who are willing to help us solve big challenges, of which this is one, of course. A little bit more on our process. On July 31st, which was the deadline, Guilderland did submit its reopening plan to the State Education Department and to the Department of Health. The plan is not officially approved. It's one of those things that no news is good news. We have not heard back, so we are understanding that our plan is good to go, even as we continue to refine it as we get closer to the opening of schools. And then it was just really a few days ago that the governor on August 7th made his declaration that schools can open. And so that is what we are working toward. The metric that he used is the infection rate. The metric was that if we have 5% or less of an infection rate based on a rolling 14-day average, we would be allowed to open. The rate as of yesterday in our region is 0.8%. Yesterday in Albany County, that rate was 0.4%. I noticed that the data has not been updated for today quite yet. Schools will close, however, based on the governor's metric, if that rate goes over 9% using a 7-day average. So we'll be watching those metrics as the year unfolds. The district, as part of the governor's statement, also needed to prominently post 3 sections of our reopening plan. All 3 we'll talk about this evening, but that's our remote learning plan, our plan for testing, and our plan for contact tracing. And then finally, the governor asked that we offer 4 informational sessions, 3 for our families and community, and 1 for our faculty and staff, all by August 21st. And this is our second of community programs this morning. We'll have another one Thursday evening at 7 p.m. and we're meeting with our faculty and staff at 2 today. The 3 guiding principles that helped us with our work, first and foremost, was a commitment to adhere to state level guidelines and ensure the health and safety of our students, faculty, and staff. But we also wanted to maximize instructional opportunities for all students. Our priority was in-person instruction for our youngest learners and those who might need additional assistance. But finally, we had to plan with flexibility in mind, and we need to continue with that mindset at this point. We understand we're likely to need to adjust due to changing conditions associated with the virus itself, but also with the daily challenges that seem to emerge as we work through all of the details. So I'm going to begin with health and safety, which is, of course, our top priority. And the whole basis for our reopening plan comes down to this notion of social distancing and the need to have 6 feet of space allowed for between individuals in all spaces, but in particular, as you can see here, in our classroom spaces. When this 6-foot guidance was provided back in mid-July, when it was confirmed, that began the process by which we could build the rest of our plans. I'll say a little bit more about social distancing. With the 6 feet of space between individuals and classrooms, that's approximately 14 students per 750 square foot classroom. I just want to point out that the number of students could be higher in those classrooms that are larger. We do have classrooms that are as many as 1,000 square feet or 1,500 square feet. So we may have some greater number of students so long as we maintain that 6 feet of space. We're also maintaining the recommendation for 12 feet of space for physical education and music, particularly that part of music where we have students and staff singing and playing wind instruments. We've also done quite a bit with signage, and you can see we're marking maximum capacity for some of our smaller faces. We're reminding folks about social distancing in areas of potential congregation, and we're using directional arrows in hallways to maintain traffic and space. And of course, these are linked to our fire safety and evacuation plans. Face coverings are also a critical part of our plan. As a reminder, face coverings are to be worn at all times by students, staff, and visitors. When 6 feet can't be maintained, students will be allowed to remove face coverings during meals and for short mask breaks. Those mask breaks will be managed by our faculty and staff based on what instruction is looking like in a particular time. If students can maintain the 6 feet, teachers may offer students an opportunity to take a break, but if they need to be closer than that, they'll need to keep their masks on. And then face coverings will be provided to faculty, staff, and students if they are needed at no cost. Of course, we welcome faculty, staff, and students to provide their own. We do have some guidance on what is acceptable and what is not in terms of the style of face coverings. We are endorsing the idea of the type that is cloth-based coverings and surgical masks that need to cover both the nose and the mouth. They need to fit properly so that our students don't need to constantly adjust them. So that will be important. Bandanas, single ply gaiters, and masks that have an exhalation valve are not acceptable. There have been a number of studies that have come out in recent weeks indicating that these are not effective. And then a question that comes up all the time: what if a child refuses to wear a mask? And the answer is similar to what we do whenever we're expecting certain behaviors and don't get them. We really need to work with the child and potentially with the family to encourage the child to wear the mask, to understand how important it is, not only for his or her safety, but for the health and safety of everyone around him and her. In extreme cases, if a child refuses, we may need to consider having the child go to remote instruction. That would be a last resort, but I just want to underscore how important it is that we encourage our children to wear their masks when they're asked to at school and on school buses. We'll also be asking our faculty, staff, and students to complete a daily health screening attestation. This will be an electronic attestation. A link will be sent out every day using School Messenger, and you can select your preference for a text, an email, or a phone call to remind you. But this attestation will ask questions about symptoms, about contact with people who may have tested positive for COVID, about travel, and we will very much need to depend on our families and our faculty and staff to be good partners with us on this endeavor to do this work before students leave the house in the morning to make sure they are in a good position to come to school and be with their peers. Students who don't complete the screening at home will need to do it at school. This will be a big effort to track down students and go through the process. So again, really looking for everyone's help to do this. And then any student or staff member with signs of COVID-19 will be assessed. We have a designated isolation area in each of our buildings and then sent home for follow-up with a healthcare provider. And this is true whether it is faculty or staff, a teacher, teaching assistant, bus driver. We will follow these procedures for everyone in our school community. So if we have to send someone home because they are exhibiting symptoms and their healthcare providers indicates they need to be tested, that healthcare provider will do the testing, or the testing can be done at a designated Department of Health testing site. I know not long ago, the governor suggested that schools would be testing sites for COVID-19. At this point, we are not testing sites. We are not authorized to be testing sites. So we will be working with the Department of Health and local healthcare providers for that to be done. And then if there is a positive test, this next bullet actually goes both ways. The district will notify Albany County Department of Health if we hear first, or they will notify us if they hear first. And then we begin the process of contact tracing, which we've had lots of questions about. The district itself does not do the contact tracing. This is a process done by the Department of Health, but they depend heavily on us to provide them with thorough, accurate information about the incident. So we'll have accurate attendance records of staff and students. We need to provide them with schedules, log of all visitors and where they have been in the buildings and what time and what date, and then information about transportation ridership, as well as other data points that might be required. I want to underscore that in all of this, we do have an obligation to be confidential about any individual's health issues. So while we will communicate with families if we have a case, we're not in a position where we can give particulars about the individual. I've also had lots of questions about the decision to close and if there is a particular number or a particular circumstance that will guarantee a closure of the district or a school building. So here is the process, because it is a process that's involved. If and when we have a COVID case or cases in a school building, we work with the Department of Health to determine the extent and duration of a potential closure. And there are key questions to be considered: the number of cases, the location, whether it's in a building, a classroom, a wing of a building, all of that geography will matter. And then, of course, the amount of contact that the individual had with others in the building or district. And the answers to all of those questions will help us determine what closes and for how long. I understand that everyone likes a black and white answer on this particular question. It's just not that black and white, unfortunately. However, the last bullet is pretty clear that this is part of the governor's metrics, that if in fact we have an infection rate in our region that's over 9%, we will in fact be closed. And then just a couple words on some other health and safety measures. We will be providing training on proper hand and respiratory hygiene, how to wear facial coverings appropriately, what social distancing looks like, symptoms of COVID-19, and this will be provided for both students and for staff. We will be limiting school visitors, but those who will visit the district perhaps will definitely need to wear facial coverings, and they'll need to complete our health screening attestation. And then we have rigorous cleaning and disinfecting protocols that are in line with CDC guidance. A big topic of late is ventilation in our buildings. Just want to say a few words about this. We have gotten questions from our community and faculty and staff about this, but I want to assure everyone that our current ventilation system operates as it was designed to, and it does follow all of our energy code requirements. On average, it's good to know that our classroom air is exchanged 4 times per hour. That is much more than typical in other spaces. We are actually even considering moving to 5 times per hour, but that is a seasonal matter. When it's very cold, if we exchange the air more frequently, it's very hard to keep a comfortable temperature, same as if it's very warm outside. And there's also been a lot of discussion about MERV filters. These are the filters in our units, and whether or not we need a higher filtration metric. Currently, we use MERV 8. This is what our system has been designed for, but we are reviewing MERV 9 and 11. The key piece is to make sure that a denser filter does not adversely affect the operation of the unit. More to come on that in the question and answer period. So now I'd like to transition to school schedules. We've also had many questions about, so what will the school day look like for all of our learners, both those in person, hybrid, and remote? So I'll share a little bit of information about that by level. Just as a FYI, for the start of the school year, we will be welcoming back faculty and staff on September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd for 3 superintendent's conference days. We'll use that time for teacher planning and preparation, training on procedures and protocols, with a big focus on remote learning and technology integration and professional development. And then to point out, on September 4th, that's the Friday before Labor Day, there will be no school and faculty and staff will not report. The first week of school, we have made a change. We are doing a phased-in start of the beginning of the school year. We will start on September 8th. However, we're going to begin with all students in participating in remote instruction. This will be approximately a half day of instruction for our learners. And the topics will be focused around our social distancing protocols, hygiene, classroom routines. It'll also be an opportunity for faculty to begin to build relationships with their learners, both those who will be in person and those who will be remote. Also, though, during this time, we want to provide an opportunity for children who will be entering new buildings for the first time to be able to visit those buildings and get a feel for their learning environment. So you see we have kindergarten gradual entry opportunities, and then orientation for our 5th and 6th graders at Farnsworth, and for our 8th and 9th graders at Guilderland High School. And our principals will be sending information out directly with more specifics about those schedules and events. This PowerPoint will be posted to the website, so I won't go through all this in tremendous detail, but here is the elementary schedule. You can see we have a staggered start for K2 and 3-4. And a reminder, I'm sure everyone knows this by now, but our 5th grade will be at Farnsworth Middle School, and it will be classrooms that are clustered together by school, and it will be staffed by our elementary teachers from the respective schools. Here is the middle school plan. I'll just point out that our 6th graders, who are technically still elementary age, will be here daily on that schedule. And then 7th and 8th grade will be on a day alternating schedule of in-person and remote. 7th grade at Farnsworth, and then grade 8 will be at Guilderland High School, but they will be taking over the 100 wing of that building. And here is a sample 6th grade schedule. Again, our families are welcome to go to the website to look more closely at this. I'll just point out that children will have the opportunity to participate in all of the content areas that we have always offered for our 6th grade learners. And here is a sample 7th grade. And here is the sample 8th grade schedule. I'll just point out this is a block schedule, and the second block of each day, 11:43 to 1:34, is a long period of time, and that will include both lunch and a content area, as the model here suggests. On A days, that would be social studies. A and B days would be social studies, and on C and D, it would be science. And then the high school schedule, again, that will be at GHS. It will be alternating every other day by alphabet, and it will be in the regular building, excluding the 100 wing, which will be for our 8th graders. Just a couple other things about our high school schedule. I'm very pleased to say that our high school will be running its master schedule based on the student requests for courses that were collected last school year. And we will be running all of our courses in the hybrid model and remotely. So that's wonderful for student opportunity. Students will be broken into 2 groups by alphabet. Group 1 is A through K, Group 2 is L through Z, and they'll come to school for in-person instruction every other day, and they'll follow their schedules, whether they're in school or remote, and we will be taking attendance for both groups. And then for those students who have opted to be 100% remote, they will be a part of their assigned class, and they'll be assigned to a group, either 1 or 2, and follow that schedule for their assigned class. And here is a sample schedule for the high school. And you'll see the bottom 2 rows indicate the alternation of Group 1 face-to-face and Group 2 remote. And again, there is week 2. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into our instructional programs. For our K-5 learners who are on site, students are assigned to grade level teams of teachers and instructional cohorts, again, of approximately 14 students. And the goal is to keep students within their cohorts throughout the day. They will receive their special ed area instruction in their classrooms, and you can see the breakdown for the frequency of that. Students will participate in physical education. Again, that requires 12 feet of social distancing. That will be provided in our gymnasiums. And then just a reminder, grade 5 is at FMS. It's clustered by school and it will be taught by their respective elementary school teachers. And then for our remote learners, we will use either Google Classroom or Seesaw as our platform. And we'll talk more about this in the Q&A, but we have designated grade level teachers to provide remote instruction. And then instruction will include daily class meetings and instruction in all content areas. And you can see the breakdown there. And it'll be a mix of live, synchronous at the same time instruction, as well as asynchronous activities. And we'll talk more about that with our panel. And then please notice there will be office hours available as well. At the middle level on site, our 6th graders attend every day. We are holding our commitment to a house and team structure, so that will remain the same, as will our 14 students per classroom. And then we'll have a homeroom to start, and the students will follow an 8-period school day. And you'll see in the chart at the bottom, it includes for all of our students, all of the content areas that we've always offered. And then to the right on that chart, you see that some students also participate in academic intervention services, special education services, English as a new language learners, enrichment, and students can also select band, chorus, and orchestra. Almost identical for 7th grade, except they will be alternating every other day. And for our 8th graders, very similar in terms of the learning opportunities, but again, they'll be housed at Guilderland High School. They'll remain in a house and with a team. We've had questions about that. And again, we'll maintain social distancing in all of the learning opportunities that we otherwise would have had. For our remote learners, students in grades 6 through 8 will follow a daily schedule, same required coursework as those who attend in person. Instruction will be provided by a dedicated remote teaching team, kind of like at the elementary, we have a dedicated classroom teacher for a particular grade. We'll have teams as we do in our middle school model. The platform will be Google Classroom, and the instruction will be a blend of live instruction as well as offline activities and assignments. Attendance will be taken and grades will be issued using our traditional grading system. And then at the high school, again, approximately 14 students. Remote students will be part of in-person instruction to the extent that's practicable. And you'll see a whole list of instructional strategies that will be used during instruction. Just want to point out our subject area, special area subjects and activities. I've mentioned several times the 12 feet of physical distance. that has created the need for us to be creative in where and how we provide these programs. And our panelists can address this a little bit in more detail. And then extracurricular activities and athletics. As for extracurricular activities, we want to offer them as many as we can, and we'll likely do many of them virtually. Interscholastic sports remains a question mark. At this point, they are not permitted. It's been delayed. The announcement of the start of the fall season has been delayed at least until September 21st, and we haven't had any new information on that of late. A couple more things about student support services. I just want to assure everyone that students who have IEPs will in fact receive all of the services that are outlined on their IEPs. And you can see the breakdown there for K6 and 712. It will look just like the services will be integrated just as they have been in the past. Our K-12 students who attend the district self-contained special ed programs, we have prioritized them for in-person instruction, but we also understand that there are families who have chosen remote instruction, and we'll be working with them to provide the supports that our children need. We also have many learners for whom English is a new language, and we will continue to provide required supports for them as well, based on their most recent proficiency level test, and that's whether they are in person or remote. We have put a priority on in-person learning for our ELLs who have special challenges, if perhaps they also have an IEP or other things that require some additional support. And then we are making an effort to translate documents for our families. I wanted to point out that we have someone taking notes on our presentations with our families so that they can be, these presentations that you're watching, so they can be translated on our website that has a translation feature on it. And then we are ever so cognizant of the level of uncertainty, and it's the stress that comes along with that is we're unsure of what the future will bring. So we are very cognizant of the need to provide social and emotional supports. So we have a subcommittee working just on this, and they are making available resources and referrals to our families. They have come up with some recommendations to provide time for teachers to develop relationships with students, which will be a priority during our phased-in opening. They've put together some excellent professional development for our faculty and staff, and recommend that we review and potentially revise our K-12 comprehensive counseling plan. We also want to provide families with information how to prepare for the return to school, whether it's live or remote. And you can see we have a resource I've listed here that's posted to our website. It's a family-friendly how to help your kids think about important things that we need to prepare for to be safe at school. So wearing a mask, hand washing, greetings, and it's very well done. So my thanks to that committee. A couple things about non-instructional support services. We continue to provide transportation to all of those families who want it. We've had several who have opted out in order to drive students to school on their own, but for those who are using our transportation, just a reminder that everyone will need to wear a face covering on the bus. Very, very important, because we can only maintain social distancing to the extent that it's practicable. And as many of our families have pointed out to me, that seems difficult on a bus that's only 7 feet wide. So face coverings are essential. Parents, I'm going to encourage you to encourage your students to wear their masks and keep them on in the bus so the bus driver can focus on safe transportation on the road. So we are limiting the number of children per seat just to 1, except we have siblings who can sit together. This is about 20 students per bus. Our bus runs are staggered. They need to be in order to maintain that 20 student per bus quotient, and you can see how they're broken down. And we will be cleaning and disinfecting once a day, and those high contact spots will get some extra attention after morning and afternoon runs. And then also very important, school lunch. We've had lots of questions about this. So students will eat in their classrooms, but they will be picking up their plated and limited touch items from the cafeterias. We procured many trays with lids to help keep the spillage in the hallways to a minimum. Students will be encouraged to pre-order using our school cafe system. That's for our middle and high school students, and we'll be using a Google Sheet for the elementary schools to order. We're trying to limit the amount of cash that's exchanged at the register, so the use of our online payment system is encouraged. If we do need to take cash, we'll work with a classroom teacher so it's not exchanged at the register. Students are going to be required to wash and sanitize their hands prior to eating lunch, always important. And then finally, for students who have elected to be fully remote, they can pick up their meals from either Farnsworth or Guilderland High School on Mondays. And for our hybrid students, they will also be able to pick up meals for the day they will be home before they leave on the previous day. One important thing I just want to point out, and that is for free and reduced, for families who qualify for free and reduced meals, that continues. Otherwise, meals will need to be paid for, whether you are remote or on-site or hybrid. So the only folks who will have free or reduced priced lunch are those who apply and qualify for it. So we're at the end here. I'm going to say to our community, thank you so much for your questions, but also for your patience and your support. We're doing our best, truly, to provide a safe and high quality learning experience for your children. Nothing is more important to us. But we know you have lots of questions. So I have shared with our panel all of the questions that came in for today's session, and I'm going to transition back to them in order to address as many as we possibly can. If you have questions that have come up while you've been listening to this presentation, you can email them to the address on the screen. That's reopening@guilderlandschools.net. And Amy Perrott, our communication specialist, is monitoring that, and we'll turn to her before we wrap up today to take as many additional questions as we can. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go back to the larger group. All right. All right, well, thank you again, everyone. You are all going to be able to just do this presentation yourselves after hearing it so many times from me, but at this point, we would like to transition to the questions that we've received. And by far, the most interest is in having a better understanding about what remote instruction is going to look like. Both when it comes to the hybrid that will be for 7 through 12, but also for our fully remote students, K-12. So I'm going to have Dr. Singleton get us started here, and then ask our other instructional leaders on the call to add additional information by level or other insights that they may have. So Dr. Singleton, let me start with you to talk a little bit about remote instruction.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wiles. As I shared last night, we have about, well, precisely 22.7% of our student population have opted for the remote learning option, and that's the fully remote learning option. So what does that mean exactly? We've had an instructional task force that's been looking at a number of different models and strategies and structures for delivering instruction remotely. You've already touched upon many of the logistics related to that question and the subject areas that will be covered, et cetera. So I won't reiterate all that you've said at this point, but I'll just talk really more so about the delivery mechanisms and how it is that we will get the instruction to those students who are at home. I would dare say one quick conclusion that we came to as we had conversations about the instructional models that can be used for remote learning is that there is not one singular way to do it, that there are actually numerous approaches to virtual learning, distance learning, remote learning, whichever terminology you wish to use. That's going to range anywhere from live or live streamed instruction where the teacher is online directly with their student synchronously at the time of instruction. That is certainly going to be utilized by our teachers. But there are also other strategies and approaches that they will consider as they plan their instruction and deliver their instruction. So in some instances, there may be an opportunity or a preference actually for things like screencasting. In some instances, there may be a preference for pre-recording lessons and delivering them at home. I know there are some strong opinions in the parent community on both ends of that. I think there is definitely a general expectation that our teachers are live and engaged with students, and they certainly will be. However, there are some benefits as well to pre-recorded options in which students and parents can rewatch or rewind or revisit the instruction at a later point in the day. So we are hoping to be very flexible in that and be able to provide the appropriate resources for parents to access instruction in a flexible manner as well as in a scheduled manner. So there will be a blend of approaches, and definitely. We've had a number of additional online resources. We had a number that were provided to parents in the spring months. We've actually added to that list over the course of the summer. So there are some additional online digital resources that will be incorporated within our instruction. I will say, however, though, I think it's important for everyone to understand that remote learning is not going to be a replica of in-person learning. There are definitely some pieces of in-person learning that we just can't replicate in this fashion by delivering online. And as we know, our classrooms are very rich with discussion and collaboration, peer-to-peer interactions, cooperative learning exercises, and some of those are very difficult to replicate through a remote learning process. We intend for our students who will be remote to follow the full curriculum as the students will in school. But inevitably, there will be some prioritization for our students who are at home as well. As we've been planning and addressing some of the logistics around remote learning and how that balances with the hybrid model and the in-person learning model, there are a number of things that have emerged that I think are important for parents to understand, specifically around how teachers will be assigned. So as we've worked through our elementary plans, for example, our elementary principals spent a good amount of time yesterday afternoon working through this. One realization that we've made, a conclusion that we've made based on the numbers of students who would be remote at every grade level and from all 5 of our elementary schools, is that we are going to likely have to blend students from multiple schools in order to form an adequately sized class section for remote learning, which means we may have, for example, 10 students from Altamont Elementary School that may be blended with another 12 students from Linwood Elementary School to form one remote section. The middle school, the high school, the middle school is looking at remote teams to be created. And then again, at the high school level, students who are remote would follow their high school schedule. So that in a nutshell is what we're looking at right now for remote learning. Again, I would encourage parents to expect to have multiple approaches and multiple resources available to them. We do want our teachers to be very thoughtful and considerate of their approaches and strategies used when engaging students remotely. But at the same time, we recognize that there are different learning styles and needs amongst our student population and preferences for how they receive that instruction. So a level of autonomy will certainly be given to our teachers to plan accordingly. But again, it will be a blended approach as we go forward with the remote learning. And I welcome anyone else to chime in on that.
Alan, anything from the elementary level? Or I see we've got Dr. Beanie on with us as well. Any other pieces from the elementary perspective?
Not on the remote learning. I think Dr. Singleton explained that pretty well. I think there are going to be some changes that we need to talk about with the in-person instruction as well, but I'll wait a little bit until we get to that.
What about our support services? How will they be delivered remotely for our students with disabilities or our English language learners? We should also think about special areas like art and music and PE, how they will be delivered remotely. But let me start with students with disabilities. And Mrs. Knowles, can you comment about the provision of those services for our remote learners?
Well, all of our remote learners will have a special education case manager assigned to them that will ensure their IEPs are implemented and making sure that materials are accessible and adapted or modified as appropriate depending on the student's needs. So, at the elementary, we're likely will have to have some flexibility with maybe how that's delivered and using the resources that Dr. Singleton highlighted, and as well at the secondary level, there'll still be tutorial periods built into the day. So teachers will be ensuring that they're touching base with their students and working with them to prioritize their work and assignments. And the special educators will also be collaborating with their general ed partners to ensure materials are appropriate for them.
All right, thank you so much. Marcia, what about our English as a new language learners? What will that remote experience look like for them?
Sure. For our English language learners, there'll be a lot of collaboration between the classroom teacher and the ENL teacher. Students won't necessarily receive ENL services separate from classroom instruction services. They'll oftentimes receive those at the same time. If they do receive ENL services, it would be with a smaller group later in the day. It's different a little bit at every level, but the general consensus across all levels is that there will be collaboration between the classroom teacher and the ENL teacher to make sure that the success of the ELs is first and foremost.
Thank you, Marcia. Mr. Winans, what about music? How is that going to look for our remote learners?
Well, we will have music at all levels, and we will be offering our normal courses. And it's going to look a little like Dr. Singleton said, it's going to look a little bit different depending on the class, the grade level, and whatnot. So there is going to be a blend of synchronous and asynchronous learning. And one big question that has been raised a lot is, will there still be lessons? So instrumentalists for grades 4 through 12 and vocalists who take lessons in grades 9 through 12 will still have lessons if they are doing remote only, or if they're in the hybrid model, lessons will be offered.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Austin, what about remote PE?
Sure, I think remote learning for phys ed, we're gonna have more live instruction than certainly maybe was the case in the spring. We'll have more Google Meets as a class, or one-on-one Google Meets, or phone calls. We'll utilize Google Classroom as much as we can. But I think we will definitely have more human-to-human connection. I know that's one of the things that the teachers talked about back in the spring. They wish they saw their students more. Our teachers missed their students, so there's going to be more of that. But we're gonna try multiple approaches. Centering around activities that can be done at home, whether that's in their living room, front yard, backyard, around their neighborhood. But activities that can be done with little to no equipment. So we're exploring some options that that will engage our students. Whether they are interactive videos that we will upload for our students to keep them engaged and active, on-demand classes. There's athletic training software that we're looking into. So we're going to try some different things to engage our kids remotely. So certainly there's no doubt about it. It will look different than it did in the spring.
All right, thank you, Mr. Austin. With all this talk of technology, we get a lot of questions about bandwidth and access to devices. So Dr. Singleton, do we have enough bandwidth to do everything we've just described?
Yes. So the quick answer is we do have enough bandwidth to do everything that we've just described. I will just share a bit of what's taken place in recent weeks, though. First off, bandwidth is something that we monitor continuously. So even when we're in person, and we've never really maxed out our bandwidth while we were in person at all. Of course, we're going into some different circumstances. So we have taken some time to consult with our Regional Information Center. If people are not familiar with what that is, the Regional Information Center, or NARIC as we call it, is basically the provider essentially of our internet. So our internet goes through NARIC and then comes to the district, and then traffic goes back out through NARIC as well. So 2 days ago, I believe it was, we had a consultation call with the representatives at NARIC to just give us their feedback on the status of our bandwidth. And while they felt that we were adequately prepared for it, we did agree that we're going to turn up the dial a little bit at the start of the school year, just to make sure that bandwidth does not become an issue. If by some, because there is an additional cost with that, so if by some chance we don't need that additional, we can always turn it back down at a later date. So we'll be monitoring that as the start of the school year kicks off. I mean, the one thing I will say about bandwidth, though, I think sometimes there is an assumption that bandwidth is kind of the end all be all, and it's the only thing that might cause any technology disruptions, and that just simply is not the case. When it comes to transmission of data through the internet, there are multiple places where you can have bottlenecks of data, and it's not all associated with bandwidth. So as I said, our internet runs through NARIC, for example. So if there are ever issues at NARIC, we could potentially have a bottleneck there. In all honesty, there are occasions when we've had bottlenecks that have been well out of our control and have actually taken place at the Google level with Google servers, where much of our systems and our services run through Google. So there are many things that can cause disruptions. I would never be foolish enough to stand here from a technology perspective and say that we will not have bumps or glitches. We inevitably will have bumps and glitches along the way. But right now we've taken the proactive steps necessary to hopefully minimize that and make sure that we're ready to go and able to support and serve our students as well as we possibly can. When it comes to devices, all of our students at grade 5 through 12 have been one-to-one for a number of years. Our elementary school has been very, very close to one-to-one. We were really forced to go one-to-one at the elementary level back in the spring, when we knew that we had to get devices out to students who, obviously were at home. Little bit of a difference, though, this fall, in that not all of our elementary students will be home. In fact, close to 80% of them will still be operating in school. So we know that we will still need devices in school. For those families that are going to be remote at grades K through 4, we expect that we'll be able to provide adequate technology, but going into the start of the school year, we know we're going to be stretched with some inventory because we're still awaiting some delivery of additional devices, which, as you might imagine, every school district right now is really placing significant and massive orders of devices. So there is quite a backlog. So we're asking parents, if at all possible, if you are remote, to support our efforts by utilizing personal devices at home. Really, all you need is an internet-connected device. But of course, if there is ever hardship, whether it be with internet connection or with access to a device, we will certainly jump in and support those families who need them. So that's where we are with devices.
All right, thank you. And then maybe one of the principals can jump in on this. We have a lot of questions about families who have opted for fully remote for the first semester, but who may change their mind and decide they want to come back in February 1st, which is the start of the second semester. What would that look like? And is that possible? Of course, the answer is yes, of course it's possible, but would one of our principals want to jump in and say, what would that look like for the returning student?
Well, from the elementary perspective, yes, of course, it's possible. But if we have significant numbers of students moving either way after the end of the first semester, We will likely need to look at our cohort structure and make some significant shifts to it. Right now, we are planning for maximum efficiency, and a few students either way will cause us to kind of relook at things, and we may end up reconfiguring our cohorts as they exist right now.
So that's the reason why we ask families to make a commitment for an entire semester as opposed for a shorter period of time, because that kind of change will potentially upend all of the structures and have to be redone.
Well,
So-
and I just chime in to add to Dr. Lockwood. I think as we are pulling out our remote learners of our existing classrooms and rebuilding our teams and rebuilding our cohorts, that's why our student placement communication has been delayed this summer. So I think the community, we appreciate your patience and your flexibility with that, but that's the reason why our student placement has not been communicated yet, because as principals, we are still going through and removing remote learners and reconfiguring all of those cohorts. And I absolutely would anticipate there would be some drastic changes that would have to happen in the second semester, just the same way with the cohorts.
And I would just add, to help with that communication, parents can probably expect communication in January, early January, where we'll revisit that idea of in-person and remote learning so that we have time to reformulate our cohorts and our groups. We'll want to do that work early in January to prepare for the second half of the year.
All right, great. Thank you, Beth. So let's transition to operations within our facilities. We've talked a lot about the students will be serving remotely. Let me start with our facilities themselves. We've had many, many questions about the most basic thing of all, and that's air, the air we breathe. Mr. Nooney, can I start with you to talk a little bit about how our ventilation systems work and the research that you're doing around appropriate filters and the use of fans and all of those things that are on everyone's mind?
Sure, Dr. Wiles. Our systems, each classroom is basically an independent system that consists of what we call a unit ventilator. Unit ventilator has an outside air damper, a face bypass damper, which is basically the damper that recirculates air. And we bring outside air in constantly to an exchange rate of approximately 4 times per hour per occupied space. Some spaces are a little less, some spaces are a little more. And we can increase that by adjusting our outside air dampers using our building management system. There are a lot of questions around filters. As mentioned in the presentation, we currently run a MERV 8 filter. We are looking at MERV 9 and MERV 11 filters. I am looking at what other districts are doing. We're working with our engineers, basically our filter providers, of what would the best approach be. There is a lot of talk around a MERV 13 filter. If we were to install those filters, we will inhibit our airflow, and that's the last thing I feel we want to do. We want to make sure we have adequate air exchange in our classrooms. And a MERV 13 filter is not proven out to filter coronavirus. I think there's just a lot of talk around HVAC systems being the cure-all or the catch-all, and they're not. They're not in a grocery store, a restaurant, a Home Depot, and they won't be in our schools. But we will maintain adequate airflow. We are going to allow the use of fans. I kind of said it. The whole guidance was to increase our air exchange in our buildings as much as possible. So whether that's opening windows, using box fans, I think when we look at fans, it's how we direct the fans that, we're not blowing across the whole classroom of students or staff. But I do feel they would be appropriate to use. We use fans for our extended school year program, outside and inside. there's a lot of work going on in the background. Currently, right now, I am leaning more towards going to a MERV 9 at the start of school. And as we transition into heating season, we'll go to a MERV 11 because we'll have to actually start closing down our outside air dampers to maintain comfort level. We will still maintain a minimum air exchange of 4 times per hour in a classroom space. Don't know if I rambled too much, but.
Yes. What about classroom spaces that have air conditioning, particularly a window-based air conditioner? We do have some of those spaces. We had a question about how that would impact air quality.
There's 2 pieces to AC. Many of our rooms have built-in air conditioning, which operates as part of that same unit ventilator system. So it's part of that same air exchange rate, whether we're cooling it or heating it. A window air conditioner basically recirculates air in the room. I would not count that as it's not part of our ventilation system. I do not see any reason why we cannot use our window air conditioners to help maintain comfort in our classroom spaces. Once again, it may be different how we point the discharge airflow into the room. But for the most part, they're recirculating air in the space. Kind of really no different in your car. You know, if it's too hot out and you push the little button, it turns yellow, it's got the arrow in it, and basically you're recirculating the same air in your car to get it cooler faster. I mean, that's how a window air conditioner is doing the same thing. It's recirculating that same air. Some of the units do have an outside vent. Typically, they're very small. Not all of them have that to bring in fresh air. But the system, even if those window air conditioners are running, our HVAC system is bringing and exchanging air at the same time.
Thank you for that. We're all learning a lot about ventilation through all of this.
Yeah, anybody wants a job in facilities, we're always looking.
So another big topic is around transportation and drop-offs and pickups. So let's start with transportation. We have a question here about transportation to aftercare locations. I know that we're working with the YMCA to offer Y time at each of our 5 elementary buildings and Farnsworth Middle School. But Danielle, what about transportation to other daycare providers within the Guilderland School District?
Well, as you know, Dr. Wiles, we service several aftercare locations throughout the district, and transportation will be provided just as it is for all the other students, with a maximum of 20 students per bus, unless they're siblings, which can sit together, but the transportation will be provided.
And for our families who have opted out of transportation for the first half of the year, will they have a chance to opt back in for the second part of the year?
The answer is yes. However, it'll be similar to what the schools will be dealing with. If we'll have to reconfigure everything at that point, but the answer is yes.
Okay, so for our families, we will be redoing our survey at some point toward the end of the first semester, so we can reconfigure everything that we need to make space for those who are returning to school. So once we pick children up and bring them to schools, we have lots of questions about what that will look like. I think it's no mystery or surprise to anyone that drop-off and pickup times, even under the best of circumstances, are very busy at each of our 7 buildings. So, Mr. Sanders, why don't I turn to you? Can you talk a little bit about what we have in place and we're working on to ease the traffic at our buildings?
Yes, Dr. Wiles. Yes, it's been a chaotic situation in some cases with all of the traffic at school, so we're very cognizant of that. What we also have to recognize is we do have a large number of transportation opt-outs, so that would seem to imply that we'll have increased parent traffic to the buildings, but there are some mitigating factors we need to remember. First of all, some of those transportation opt-outs are related to opt-outs of in-person instruction, so those families will not be bringing their child to school, so a portion of those are set aside. The other thing that we have to remember is that we're staggering schedules at the elementary level, and then we're doing alternate day instruction at the upper grade levels. So in essence, we're having multiple drop-off and pickup times, or alternating drop-off and pickup times, that will essentially have the total traffic to the building, divide that by half. It'll spread over 2 different time periods or 2 alternate days. So that should also mitigate the traffic that's coming into and out of the building. But we're very cognizant that we may have increased traffic, and we want to plan for that. So we are involving the assistance of the Guilderland Police Department. We've contacted them. Next week, we're going to be going out and making some site visits to some schools and looking at traffic patterns and trying to determine whether we can make any improvements into the circulation or how we have the drop-off and pickup locations where they are now. Should they be moved or modified in some way? Danielle will be part of that as well, to see if we can make any of those adjustments or accommodations that may help with pickup and drop-off. The other thing, as we mentioned, is we do have less bus routes since we have less students traveling. So although we're increasing parent traffic, we're also reducing some of our own bus traffic at the same time. And then finally, I just want to mention that at the elementary schools, we're looking at a card system to help more quickly identify when a parent is there to pick up a child and who that child is, and connect them as quickly as possible so they can get them in the car and moving, and kind of keep the traffic flowing at the same time that will occur at pickup. So that's a new system for us, but we do think that will have lead to some efficiencies in matching up students and their parents and getting them out of school in a more timely fashion.
Would any of our principals like to weigh in on this? Because you live the reality of this each and every morning in your respective buildings.
Well, it's going to be a challenge, but like Mr. Sanders said, you know, we're not quite sure what the arrival time in particular is going to look like yet because of the staggered start times. I would just, you know, remind parents and ask parents to talk with their children and work with their children. Things are going to go much quicker if students know how to and are able to get out of the car themselves and get their own backpack, rather than parents getting out and going around and opening the door for them, as often happens, particularly with our younger students. But if students can work on being independent like that, we're going to be able to manage the traffic flow much easier.
Yeah, I would.
I was just going to add also for parents to really look for the adults that are out there. We're trying to develop systems that keep our drop-off and arrivals safe and away from our school buses. So there are going to be different traffic patterns for our parents in cars and our buses. So look for those adults. We're going to try to help you with these routines so that arrival and dismissal can go smoothly and safely.
Yeah, I would reiterate that this is something that we definitely need help from our parent community with. The greater independence, especially at the middle level, allowing students to quickly exit the vehicle when they're getting dropped off and enter the vehicle when that dismissal will help. But ultimately, I would like to ask for everybody's patience and flexibility and understanding that it will take some time to identify the challenges and iron out the kinks. So we anticipate doing that work as soon as we start and see the extent of what we have to manage. But you know, we are hopeful that the staggered schedules will mitigate some of what we're looking forward to. So, but your patience is much appreciated.
Amen. Mr. Piscatelli, any comments about high school? We'll have an extra grade there now.
The only thing I'd say, everybody said it very well. The only extra thing at the high school we're going to have is throw student drivers into the mix, as well as parent drop-offs and buses. So we are expecting a lot of congestion. Not to mention, you know, our beginning of the day is going to be a lot more compressed than it usually is. Normally we have like 20, 25 minutes from drop off to the start of first block. This year, it's a 10-minute window. So from when the buses release the students to when homeroom starts. So everybody is going to have to move efficiently from the parking lot into the school building and directly to their classes. So that's all I'd add.
All right, thank you, everybody. We've also had a number of questions about health-related matters if children have symptoms. And as we all know, COVID-19 has a long list of symptoms, many of which are similar to other kinds of ailments that we see in children all the time, sore throats, headaches, and on and on. So we have questions, a question about what's the protocol if my child wakes up in the morning with bad allergies? Do I keep them home? What's the process there? I just want to point out that our health screening attestation will ask if these are new symptoms that can't be otherwise attributed. So if you know your child has allergies, you're going to need to make a judgment about, is this part of their just what they routinely have to work through. We also had questions about whether or not you need a doctor's note if a child stays home with a sore throat that's not necessarily COVID related. And the answer to that is no, if it's not COVID related. If it is COVID related, we will have a protocol for the return to school. And I'd like to say more about that, but our head nurse is not on the call right now because she happens to be on another call with some health professionals talking about the reopening of school and how best to handle these kinds of things. Also on this Friday morning, the superintendents and health directors from the Albany County school districts are actually meeting with Elizabeth Whalen to talk about all of these particulars about what happens when we have a student or a staff member who is ill. So rather than speculate now beyond what's already in our plan, I'm going to say we'll be updating our information as a result of that new information or that clarified information. So that's where I'll leave health issues for right now. We had a couple more logistical kinds of questions, and then I'm going to turn to Amy to see if we have had any new people come in. But one of the questions we had to do with backpacks and lockers. How will that work for the upcoming year? And probably middle and high school. Mr. Laster, you look poised to respond.
Yeah, sure. So we are not allowing students to use their lockers. So we will be allowing students to use backpacks and then leave stuff in the classrooms that they'll be assigned to. That's our plan for this school year.
And more the same thing. We are not planning on using lockers. And again, students will be carrying their items in their backpacks.
Okay. Another logistical kind of question has to do with attendance taking, which of course will be far more complex when we have a variety of options for students to be in attendance at school. What will that look like for our learners?
I can start with the high school. I mean, we are having conversations about how we're going to take attendance for the remote learners. And I think a lot of it depends on what the instructional activity we're doing that day is. If we're doing a live streaming activity where the students are the remote students are part of that instruction, then it makes sense that attendance be taken right from the roster that's participating. If it's some form of asynchronous activity, we're probably going to have attendance taken by either an assignment submitted in or some other method of doing a check-in with those students.
Anything different for middle or high?
No, we anticipate creating a structure so that the remote learners will have to be, accounted for and taken attendance, just like a normal school day, period by period. And then, adjust the attendance. If there's students who have attendance concerns, we would handle it just like we would in previous situations.
And then a related question is about grading. we know that in the spring, we transitioned to a non-traditional approach of demonstrates evidence of learning and does not demonstrate evidence of learning. But in the fall, we'll be grading all student work, whether they're here or remote. And we have someone ask, so how will parents be communicated with regarding students' grades so they can keep track of them too?
At the elementary level, we would anticipate the same types of communication. We have to work out plans for parent conferences in the fall, out of which, we have good conversations with parents. Not sure yet if those will be live or remote. And that's followed up by a conference report that goes into the parent portal at eSchool Data. And likewise, there'll be the quarterly progress reports afterwards that will be completed by the teachers for all students, in person or remote students. And just as usual, if we start to notice some academic concerns with a student, then the teacher would be reaching out directly to parents to indicate that there's a concern or a problem and try and collaborate on a solution.
Great.
At the middle level, I see it the same way. Grades would look very similar to what we've done in the past. If parents and teachers need to collaborate on a plan for success for a specific student, the parent would contact the House Secretary to schedule potentially a phone call, potentially a virtual parent-teacher conference, some way for us to collaborate together to create a plan for that student to be successful. So.
Really, at the high school level, eSchool Data is a big piece in the parent portal, or having your child log in and look at their grades over their shoulder is another recommendation we always have too for parents if they want to see what their grades are. Google Classroom is another communication link, and there's ways to tie parents into that as well.
Great, thank you, Mike. I'm going to stay with you, Mr. Piscatelli, because we had a couple questions about SAT exams. And we ended up canceling our August 29th administration. Can you talk about why that was canceled? And maybe Mr. Nooney wants to weigh in there. And more importantly, what opportunities do our students have to take that exam in the near future? But first, why did we cancel?
We canceled because we just didn't feel like we were in a position prior to school opening to be prepared to have 300 students in the class, proctors in the smaller settings like we will once the school year opens. We are definitely poised to be able to do all the SAT administrations once the school year begins, and we have pretty much an SAT administration plan for every month right through the month of December at Gilliland High School.
Okay. In the last question before I turn things over to see what Amy has heard is maybe the most important question of our whole piece here. But a community member asked us what we're going to do to ensure cultural and racial equity in our plan to reopen schools. This is an absolute top priority for us as a school district under all circumstances. And so it would not change because we're reopening schools with a variety of models. But would there anyone on the panel like to weigh in on some of the things we've been doing this summer and plan for in the fall?
I can jump in, Marie, if you'd like.
Sure.
I mean, as you noted, this has been an ongoing conversation for us in the district, stretching from professional development to realigning curriculum, forming new collaborative groups. We, in fact, had a meeting yesterday with a high school team that is really focusing on anti-racism and practices in not just in our classroom, but I would say structural and systemic practices as well. And that's a group that consists of students, teachers, and administrators. And I had the pleasure of sitting in yesterday. Really some fantastic conversation amongst that team, thinking about like I said, the professional development end of things, but thinking about the messaging and how we are going to, really establish a strong message around not just embracing diversity, but taking a very strong anti-racist stance in our classes in our schools. So some planning steps, some action steps emerged from that conversation yesterday. We will be continuing to follow up on those. I would also add that throughout the course of the summer, we've been doing some curriculum revision activities, I would say largely at the language arts area, as well as our social studies curriculum area, where in social studies, we've been realigning curriculum to social justice frameworks that are produced by the tolerance.org website and organization. And then we've also placed orders for literally thousands of new books to diversify the texts that our students are going to have access to and be working with. As we said yesterday, the word that I used with the team yesterday is that this is our imperative. This is not an initiative. This is work that is not going to end. It is work that in some areas may be beginning, but it certainly isn't the start of the conversation. We've actually been discussing this for several years now, but I do see some very healthy momentum taking place right now, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out, even though we are faced with the challenges of a social health pandemic. But the racial pandemic is one that we have to acknowledge, recognize, and address just as aggressively as we do the physical health and safety of our students and our staff.
And I'll point out that our Board of Education has also indicated that this is a top priority for their work. They'll be talking later in September about the specifics of a goal in keeping this at the forefront of our work. And part of that will be the creation of some kind of a working group. We're thinking about a social justice coalition that will keep us focused on the work, define the work, and do some of the work. So very much a part of the work and our commitment as we reopen schools. So thank you to whoever sent that question.
Marie, I'll just add one other thing. Tomorrow, we actually will be running an orientation with our new teachers, which, as you might imagine, is a very small crew this year. There wasn't a huge amount of hiring, but that will be a primary focus in the orientation of our new teachers tomorrow. So we look forward to welcoming them and making sure they understand our values and our position and our priorities in the district.
Excellent, thank you. So Amy, as we've been talking here, have we received any new questions?
Yep, we have a few, so I'll just rapid fire them out for whoever wants to grab them. So this one came in about school schedules. It's, let me just read it. Mike Piscatelli, this would be for you probably. Can you please clarify the schedule for 10th to 12th graders? I know they go to school in person every other day. Does that mean 1 week my child would go 2 days, the next week they would be in person 3 days? Or is it always 2 days per week in person?
They actually had it right the first time. 1 week one group will be in 3 days for live instruction. The next week they'll be in for 2, and then it'll alternate like that. So that is correct.
And there's a sample in the PowerPoint that I know I raced through earlier, but they can see what a sample will look like.
Okay, another school schedule. This would be elementary, but it was brought up about, will there be accommodations for siblings in elementary school with 2 different starting/end times?
I'm not sure about accommodations. We are also partnering with the YMCA, and we'll hopefully have a before school program in every elementary school, so that parents who are in that situation could talk to the YMCA and register their child for that program. But otherwise, we do not have additional staff or locations for students to be dropped off, that far in advance of the start of their school day.
And I would say the same and echo the same for the middle school. We are partnering with the Y, so any staff member or any community member who wanted to drop off their child anytime earlier than 8:55 for 5th and 6th graders or 9:55 for 7th graders would have to contact the Y for childcare.
And I believe the registration process is now open.
Yes, that's my understanding. It's on their website, I believe.
Okay. Next, this one is about probably marking absence. So it says, in times where the school shifts to completely remote, if children are expected to be online during live instruction but can't because they're at daycare or elsewhere, will they be considered absent?
I think we're going to have to say that's to be determined if in fact we come to some point where we are fully remote. When that happened last year, we were able to be flexible about that. I would assume we would have to be flexible again, and that we would be getting some guidance from actually the state education department on that.
That was basically then the question further said, during the spring, work was done in off hours. Will this no longer be acceptable? So it was kind of something else where could you reach out and kind of discuss it with the teacher?
So I think we're going to need to work on that. We're all going to remain very hopeful that we remain in session for the entire school year. So everyone needs to wear their mask and wash their hands. Very important. Are there other questions, Amy?
Yes, we have several. There was about sports, essentially what is happening with fall sports, if they return, and I hope they do, when will take place?
Sure. And as Dr. Wiles said earlier, no recent news since the announcement that fall sports has been delayed until September 21st, although I do anticipate an update on that, by Labor Day at the latest. So when will they occur? I think it'll be a combination. I do think if we do start on the 21st, the majority of our practices will be held between the 4:30 to 6 o'clock hours. But I think you'll see a combination. I think you'll see some practices in the morning when they can be scheduled in the morning. The only thing with that is it's dependent mainly on our coaches' availability. Many of our coaches are teachers. And even though like the high school, for instance, has a 10 o'clock start time, teachers are required to be in before that. So, and the elementary and middle school has earlier start days, K through 6. So, so if they're an elementary coach, they're starting even earlier. So I think, most of the practices will be held between the 4:30 to 6 o'clock hours, but I think you'll certainly could see a mix with some morning practices in there.
Thank you. Amy, we probably have a time for a couple more.
Okay, let's do one on transportation. It says, essentially, will bus routes be much earlier for pickups given the earlier openings? Do we have a sense of that time?
Well, I think naturally they'll be earlier, probably by about 15 minutes, since the first drop off is 15 minutes earlier than last year. However, we're not finished with our bus routes, so I can't say for sure, but I think it's safe to say that they will be a little earlier.
Danielle, when can people anticipate knowing their bus pickup time and drop off time? And that'll be available on the portal eSchool data, correct?
Correct. We are buttoning these routes up hopefully by the end of this week. And at that point, we'll have to have our IT department work their magic and make all that happen so it's imported into eSchools. And then I'd say mid next week, they'll be able to access that information.
Okay, great. Amy, how about one more from our new emails?
Okay, let's see. This was just kind of a general one based on our discussion. If my child starts in school in September, is it possible for her cohort, it's possible that her cohort will change in February when people re-enter?
I would say it's possible, but yet to be determined. I think that it's probably a little premature to say with 100% confidence that it will or will not change right now. But as Dr. Beeney indicated earlier, when we get into the December, January timeframe, we will certainly be reassessing and seeking input from parents about their plans to continue with remote learning or not. and likewise with in-person. So we will get to that point at a little bit of a later date.
But it would be a priority to minimize the amount of movement for any child.
Definitely.
And just real quick, one sneaky one in here, Dr. Wiles. There was a question, can I still choose remote only learning for my child?
The deadline has passed, but the reality is I anticipate that we may have families who begin in person and switch to fully remote, and that is their right. The opposite until February 1st will not be true. If you have selected remote for the fall, you're committed to it through the 1st of February at the least. It is very, very hard to plan when people are changing their minds. So if it is an emergency, please call your building principal and we can have a conversation. But we really do need to build plans and be able to stick to them. Otherwise, we can't answer the questions that everyone is asking us. All right, any words of wisdom from this esteemed panel who joined us this morning?
I would just say we're still looking forward to a great year. It's going to be different from any other year that we've ever had, but it's still going to be a really good year.
And I'm super excited to welcome the 5th graders to the middle school. I know it's not the traditional end of their elementary career, but we're going to make it a wonderful experience for our 5th graders. And I'm excited to meet and get to know all of you and your families. So.
All right, well, thank you all for your time. Thank you for everyone who joined us and watched the presentation today. We continue to welcome your questions. Please visit our website often. Don't forget our frequently asked questions section, which will be updated as fast as we possibly can with new information as it becomes available. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.